Grunch of Giants by R Buckminster Fuller, Chapter 3, Heads or Tails, We Win, Inc. What a chapter title. Heads or Tails, We Win, Inc. I'd like to start this chapter with a quote from the chapter, which Fuller said came from a member of the Morgan family. He said, "Bucky, I am very fond of you, so I'm sorry to have to tell you that you will never be a success. You go around explaining in simple terms that which people have not been comprehending, when the first law of success is never make things simple when you can make them complicated." And that's really what it seems like, especially when it comes to law and corporate speak, whatnot. And although in media they do the opposite, they go on the principle of KISS, keep it simple, stupid. So you're either getting ultra complicated, unnecessarily complicated, or ultra dumbed down, simplified absurdity, stupidity, and never just accurate descriptions of reality. You know, it's funny, every now and then politicians emerge that call themselves straight shooters, and that implies that the rest of them are not straight shooters. I don't know about you, but I like people to just tell it like it is. Why do we have to disguise and confuse and mislead and manipulate? Corporations are not tools. Bucky qualifies why corporations are not tools according to his criteria. Corporations are neither physical nor metaphysical phenomena. They are socioeconomic ploys, legally enacted game playing, agreed upon only between overwhelmingly powerful socioeconomic individuals and by then imposed upon human society and its all unwitting members. And this has always been my issue. People have no idea the game's rules, including myself, and how the game is stacked against you. Heads we win, tails you lose, or as this chapter is called, heads or tails we win. But let's examine the definition again. Corporations are neither physical nor metaphysical phenomena. And I underlined those because in the previous chapter, he was talking about tools being physical or metaphysical. And he's saying that a corporation is neither physical or metaphysical. They are socioeconomic ploys, legally enacted game playing, agreed upon only between overwhelmingly powerful socioeconomic individuals, and by then imposed upon human society and its all unwitting members. Man. Yeah, you know, it's funny. It's like a lot of times you see laws that get passed, and they're so against humanity. You're like, who would vote for this? What person would have voted for this? This is insane. Why? What people would have actually enacted some of these laws in the majority to get a vote passed? That's not how it works. According to this, agreed upon by overwhelmingly powerful socioeconomic individuals and by then imposed upon human society and its all unwitting members. Man, that's a great definition. When Bucky's against corporations, I can stand with him for his perspective because he has created inventions on his own, and the corporations wanted to modify the way he did it for profit motive and for the motive of profit to be the exclusive reason for the venture versus doing it for the advancement of mankind. And you know, there was investors that invested in him and they didn't see the return on investment that they wanted and kind of gave him a bad name. But profit motive has never been his motivation, Buckminster Fuller's motivation for his inventions. The advancement of mankind is. So I can be behind Bucky because he's actually produced and he's created inventions. He didn't just sit around and whine about corporations. He did things to make life better for everybody and was thwarted essentially by the corporations. Well, actually, at first, the corporations tried to help him, but when they found out that he wasn't playing with the same rules that they were playing with, then they weren't really as interested. The corporations, and you'll see in this chapter, he does admit that the strategies and tactics that the corporations and the evolution of them have rapidly advanced human society. He does acknowledge that, but at this point, they have grown so gargantuan that they are now detrimental to society, in his view. To understand the game, you must understand the Giants games. The Grunch are non-human and invisible, and the greatest giants of history. game-playing equipment, rules, and scoring systems. Study the history and development of giants themselves. Fuller's goal with this book is to explain it all for all to see and comprehend. This chapter is pages 18 through 32 in the book. And if it was just disclosed to people on how the game is, this wouldn't be so seemingly so wicked. There are a lot of pros and positives to it, but there's a lot of cons as well. And because everybody doesn't get included in it and there's active ways to suppress people from participating in it, that's where I think it gets the bad name. So part of it is to understand the history of the giants. The Grunch has existed a long time. Well, the giants have listed a long time. They didn't quite become a Grunch until modern time. But fighting the giants has been part of folklore for the ages. So in the earlier chapters, we had Jack and the Beanstalk, David and Goliath in the BC times, and then Roland from 800 AD, also known as Childe Roland, the son of Charlemagne's sister Giles, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, and he vanquished giants, Ferragus and Eomont. He was also known as Orlando Furioso, and Fee Fi Fo Fum is a recurring word that exists in many of the tales of the giants. Fee Fi Fo Fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Authors and mentions were that he had found in his studies: Ludovico Ariosto, Turpin, Archbishop of Reims, Dante in Paradiso, Chanson de Roland, 1100 AD, and in King Lear's Shakespeare. And these are all books or authors that made mention of Roland. And Roland may have been a person or he may have been an idea, but he was the one fighting the giants and has been mentioned by many different names, by many different authors over the ages. And the idea is those that have more powerful controlling those that have less power and their methods of doing it. And the giant isn't exclusive to just Western societies. You have North China's giant, which was a little man with a club mounted on a horse who could overwhelm the big on-foot tribe-leading shepherd. His single advantage allowed him to take anything he wanted and bully everyone, and his advantage being that he's on a horse with a weapon. The horse-mounted bully could lay claim to all land and take crops or livestock from farmers, and there was nothing anyone could do about it except surrender and accept protection. Fuller says this is the origin of property and origin of emperors. The emperor's henchmen would be rewarded with deeds to the land in proportion to the deeds at arms they performed for him. So I underline the word accept and the word deeds, because these are some of the origins of these terms that you see in many legal documents, especially when pertaining to property rights. Buckminster Fuller is, considered part of the left. The left does not like property rights, but I think it's because they never got a fair shake at property rights and were always dominated by a higher force that got to own the land, and the ownership of the land gave them all the power, and everyone else just had to live on the land and live under the control. I think property rights are important, but the unequitable ownership of the property rights that exist in present day is not nice. But to extinguish property rights, I think, would be a mistake. Legal terms. As I had mentioned on the previous slide, we have the terms accept, property, and deeds. And if you want to learn the rules of the game, as Fuller said in the previous slide, you have to learn the rules, and law is a major part of it. And even a preliminary investigation of law, it represents a far different approach and perspective than the one you've been taught and understand. There's many things you could do with law that would surprise you. I'm not going to go into it here, but you might want to check it out if you haven't already. And then he kind of goes into a origin of words. So he has pa and ys, which is for land, ped, foot. So ped, ant, pa, ys, antry, peasantry is of the root of on the land and on foot. So that's a peasant and peasantry. And a patriot could come from pagans, peasantry, and patois. Not sure. I'm not into the linguistic origins of things, so I can't really explain it, but he put that there at the bottom in a footnote and just kind of wanted to show you a origin of peasantry, patriot, and other words. Page 21 discusses human migratory patterns. Polynesian descendants didn't observe land ownership. The Great Spirit granted them fishing and hunting cultivating rights. Indians thought they were granting licenses, not land, because in their minds, only the Great Spirit could own the land, but not people. And he differentiated between Eastern and Western civilizations' origins. The East was by sea, the West by land. The seafaring civilizations didn't develop land ownership rights due to the always shifting waters. So they couldn't imagine someone owning land because the water was always shifting around. And it was saying the Native Americans, the Indians, descended from the Polynesian seafaring people, and that's where their thoughts came from. But as we continue, we'll see that these two worldviews mesh together to form essentially the Grunch's laws and rules, because maritime admiralty law is the law of the seas, and most of even our laws on the land all have an aquatic background or origin to them. And it's interesting to read the human migratory patterns that Fuller describes. It kind of gives you a nice history of mankind from both the West and the East, and the difference in ideologies and what the Indians thought. But again, I don't want to plagiarize it, and it's just so brilliantly written that I really think you should just read it yourself and then just use this as a guide to kind of interpret what was said. And what was said there really, again, doesn't fit to my agenda of the breakaway civilization and artificial scarcity. The Grunch itself is the breakaway civilization, and their method of power and control is artificial scarcity. Interest in kind. And this is where Bucky's fascination with linguistic origins comes in handy in order to understand the origins of legal terms. So cattle initially were put up as collateral for the banker's loan of money. When the voyage was successfully completed, the merchant ship venturers repaid the banker and paid interest in the form of calves that had been born during the collateralized time. This was called payment in kind. Kind meant kinder, or children of the cattle. Think kindergarten. So basically, as you're holding the cattle as collateral, all the offspring you could create with that cattle while you have it, that's your payment for lending out the money for the voyage. So once the cattle was no longer used as collateral and only gold and silver was used, you couldn't breed money. So interest was taken from the borrower. So you no longer could just, hey, whatever you do with my cow while you have it, it's your business. Once it was no longer cows and it was money being used, you couldn't breed it. So now interest was the new form of interest. It was the in-kind payment. So farmers are producers of real wealth. Bankers produce fake wealth. Yet the banker charges 10% interest, which is the equivalent to 100 man-days of life support in Bucky's terms. And the interest diminishes the producer's real wealth constantly and increases the non-producer's wealth everlastingly. And the banker just kind of creates it out of thin air, whereas the farmer or the real person creating real wealth is actually producing something of actual value. So in present day, inflation eats your purchasing power. It is a hidden tax. Inflation is a form of interest paid to the Grunch. And you got to ask yourself, why does inflation grow at 3% annually? Why? Why is there inflation? Why? I mean, there's tons of answers. You could provide me an answer, but it really seems like a cookie cutter answer that is just the status quo answer. But when you think about it, you're like, why? Is it because mankind grows at 3%? That, like human population grows at 3% annually. That would be a reason for inflation that I could almost accept. Anything else, though, it seems like it's just they're jacking up by 3% annually just to boil the water hotter each year. Turn it up until all your purchasing power is nothing. So imagine, just in case the inflation, it's not a part of your reality, just imagine getting $1 And then every year, your dollar loses 3% of its purchasing power. So in the year 1912, it's worth 100 cents. But every year, it loses its purchasing power by 3 cents per year. So you do the math on that, and you'll find that in 33 and a half years, your dollar is worth nothing. And the Federal Reserve has been in existence for over 100 years. It's been 104 now in 2016. So your dollar actually has negative purchasing power if inflation grew at 3% annually since 1912. And this is why it costs so much more than it used to cost, because your money has less purchasing power. To buy the same exact stuff that you could buy 50 years ago costs you so much more now in present day because of inflation. And yet it's the same exact product. And I guess it's a mechanism to discourage saving, because I guess the point of money is to have it circulating. So you might as well spend your money in present day while it has more value than saving it for later when its purchasing power will be diminished, unless you invest it at an interest rate that exceeds the rate of inflation. Origin of stock market insurance corporations. Created in 1390 England, formed by King of England and friends, removed liability from personal risk for venturers. You can sue a company, but not an individual. If venture failed, shareholders lose investment, but were not liable for debts. Creditors are the losers, not the shareholders. Bankruptcy would not affect shareholders. Shareholders held absolutely blameless for misfortunes. The banker holds the collateral. So as naughty as this sounds, this is what helped build the world. 1522, Magellan circumnavigates the world, which makes it a closed system. Prior to that, I guess they just figured they didn't know how far it went. And Magellan's not too far removed from Columbus, who sailed the ocean blue in 1492, but in 1522, Magellan circumnavigates the world. Yet, we know that Columbus made a mistake because he thought he found India, but he found North America. But we don't question Magellan. Maybe he thought he circumnavigated the world, but how do we know for sure? Maybe he made a mistake. Maybe not. Who knows? But Queen Elizabeth expands upon the single ships to enterprises of many ships, where shareholders can earn perpetual dividends as long as the company remains operating. And this was the East India Company, which is known as the first corporation. And that had, that you could have shareholders and whatnot. So the evolution of the stock market, shareholding, insurance, corporations, these were important parts of history. If these didn't happen, all the stuff that we have nowadays, we wouldn't have. But the inequity that we also do have in present day may not be as big, but you could make the argument that back then, serfs versus landlords, wow. The inequity was back then too. And this is where I differ from leftists and Democrats, but I'm not aligned with the right. My position is, you don't put them out of business through laws and taxes, and those are all their tools. Those are their mechanisms. You make them obsolete by revealing that there's artificial scarcity and giving the ability to every person on Earth, the advanced 3D printing mechanisms that would allow them to provide everything, every material good that they could possibly need, which creates an even playing field. That's the real way you create the even playing field. The even playing field I often get from my Democrat friends is they want everybody to start at zero. And I'm like, all right, well, that's fine, but I'm a lot more advanced than some of our other friends that are lazy bums that provide negative value. Like, they don't even provide neutral value. They provide negative value. They're messing things up. So at the end of my life, shouldn't I have more than the other guy? And shouldn't I allowed to be passed down to my children the fruits of my labor? And they have a hard one on that because they know how hard I work. And some of the examples of people I use, they know them, and they're like, yeah, you should be rewarded. So, but the key here is, I'm good enough to say, hey, let's let everybody have everything so that I won't be better than anybody. And if I am, who cares? It doesn't matter. I'm trying to take People are going to be irresponsible, and I'm trying to remove the consequences of when people are irresponsible, the consequences that happen to others around them who may be responsible or may be innocent or may be dependent. I want to make a life better for them so that all the bad apples don't make life hard for everybody else. Because that's what you have right now. But seemingly in present day, you can take advantage of, you could create your own corporation, whether it's an LLC, an S corporation, or another kind of corporation, and you could get some tax advantages. In the United States, you can choose to make investment income instead of earned income. Earned income is taxed a lot higher than investment income. Then you have to have the money in the first place to invest to get the investment income, but you could do it. It's not like these options aren't available to you. You just got to work a little harder and think a little bit differently. You could even have offshore accounts. There might be a money limit where a minimum to invest. And same with investment tips. You have to have like a minimum of $250,000 for them to talk to you. But at least hey, you just got to earn $250,000 and have that saved up, and then you could join the club and move from there. So some hard work's required. A lot of people just kind of want it all for free without working for it. I'm trying to provide that with ending artificial scarcity. But most people aren't behind that. I don't know why. I don't know why they don't want to advance the awareness of artificial scarcity. And so for those that don't, I'm like, all right, well, if we're going to still play in this system, I'm going to try to win at this game. And I'm not going to hear your whines and complaints. If you're not standing with me on ending artificial scarcity, well, then I'm going to advance the capitalist way and say, all right, well, here, look, you can't really whine then. Here's the way you do it. Here's the rules of corporations. Here's the rules of earned income versus investment income. And here's tax havens. Here's tax advantages. There's many ways to do it. So shut your whining or join my team of ending artificial scarcity. And then you could be a lazy bum because you'll have robots and automation to create everything for you. Otherwise, no, if we're going to play by the same game, then here's how you win at that game. It takes work. It takes effort. And you know what? There's going to be some people that had an easier road than you did. And you just got to live with that and suck it up. I can adapt. I can live in both systems. And I'm going to win. At whichever one we're in, I'm going to win. So the removal of personal liability and personal risk is what helped expand trade, expand exploration, creation of corporations, shareholders, stock market, etc. It's what built the world. Birth of the corporation. This newborn, abstract, legal giant was to be treated as a human personality, empowered to do anything humans can do, but also accredited to operate as an abstract, legal entity, able to enter or leave any nation without a passport. As such, it was able to employ millions of people and any amount of money, tools, buildings, and equipment, and to perform its giant acts anywhere about the oceanic world exclusively for the profit and perpetuity only of its shareholders. And that's where, multinational corporations have a significant advantage and a conflict of interest and, law advantages than this small business owner. And yeah, so this definition is a great definition. The end of it, where it's exclusively for the profit and perpetuity only of its shareholders. Well, yeah, but, buy some shares, man. Get in on it. But I know that's not available for everybody. Yeah, there's a problem here. But again, he does show in this definition that it did employ millions of people. It got everybody working, generated money, tools, buildings, equipment. It created the whole world that we have. And, with many pros, there's also many cons. So it's just not perfect. And you can make it go all the way if you just talk about ending artificial scarcity. That's it. But nobody wants to do it. It's because you all like the control. USA 14th Amendment. Individual states grant the corporation all privileges and protection granted to human citizens. In 1980, Supreme Court granted free speech to corporations. So I looked it up. And I'm assuming the case is in 1980 in Central Hudson Gas and Electric Corp versus Public Service Commission, the Supreme Court invalidates a New York regulation that banned promotional advertising by an electric utility company. The ruling lays out a 4-part balanced test for determining if a restriction on commercial speech, either by individuals or corporations, violates the First Amendment. Justice Rehnquist dissents, arguing that a state-created monopoly is not entitled to protection under the First Amendment. Personhood of corporations has obviously now been a debate going on for 40 years and probably even longer than that. The way I approach it is I just want to learn the game so that I could participate in it. It's going on. You're not going to stop it. So how can I profit from it? It sounds bad when you say it like that, but I'm like, all right, well, what's the game and how can I play? You're not going to beat them in their game. They're going to beat you. It's stacked in their favor. The way you make it end is by removing the artificial scarcity. That's where their power comes from. You remove that, game over. But if you think you're going to beat them by using the rules of their game, you're going to lose. Heads or tails, we win. Evolution of the corporation. People applauded the new stuff they received. Shareholders secretly received their dividends. The British Empire cut the pirates out of their schemes by introducing bookkeeping via annual balance of trade. On page 30, common people were eventually priced out of investing. Pikers, on-foot pike-bearing castle guards. Let's keep the pikers out. Describes the origin of sweatshops, how they're paid so low and the profits paid so high. The rise of mass production generating wealth for the few, and how it was the masses who produced all of the goods. Page 31 to 32 describes how they are able to do so much more with so much less. And page 32 is the evolution of the calculator and computer, and how these advances should have made every person, corporation, and government obsolete. Yet these same power structures are in place that were here for 400 years, and they're no longer needed. So the part, I don't like people getting priced out. That's lame. That's keeping people out, and that's going to eventually lead to them uprising against you, unless you stack it so high that they could never form a response. And then, doing more with less, and that progress and profits not being passed down to everybody and only being passed down to a few, that's wrong. Although if were the people working the ones that came up with the better ways to do it, well, maybe if they didn't have to spend all that time working and they got to spend the time figuring ways to make things more efficient, yeah, maybe they would have. But even the people that make the more efficiencies probably get cut out of the profits, and just the owners who had an economic advantage got it. So again, yeah, there's total inequity going on. They're the giants. They're the Grunch. And I don't know the only way I know to stop it is ending artificial scarcity. You try to beat them with their own rules in their game, you're going to lose. And I think there's an example used later on in the book of how they could do so much more with so much less, yet continue to raise the prices, is like of an electric company. Annually, they find more and more efficient ways to produce more and more energy for less money, yet their prices continue to go up. And they have a monopoly on it. It's not like you have your own power plant at your house. So that's definitely a form of artificial scarcity and gouging and artificial scarcity, and you end that. And that amount of money they get $100 to $200 to $300 per household per month. That's a Grunch right there. And the way they do it is having the invisible know-how, and it'll be a tightly held secret never revealed. Too big to fail. Page 33. Initially, companies acquired their competition. So an example was General Mills ate up the canned goods and processed foods companies. General Electric ate up the electric companies, etc. But then they diversified, and the big became gargantuan. So in 1981, DuPont acquired Conoco for $7.57 billion to form the seventh largest industrial corporation in the U.S. When you become so large, you qualify for Keynesian bailouts. Lockheed was bailed out. Chrysler received a multi-billion-dollar guaranteed loan, and they make tanks for the military. And it's interesting because he calls it too big to fail, and too big to fail was a big term in 2008, talking about all the bailouts that happened, and people acted as if this was the first time this happened, And how could this happen? But reading, when I initially read Grunch of Giants like 6 years ago, I kept looking to the front of the book. I'm like, man, this is like present day stuff. Too big to fail, bailouts, and other stuff. So yeah, this book is intriguing to look at years later to see how the same schemes ran back then in the early 80s are the same schemes that are ran today because we don't know history. Bailouts and government loans are not consistent with free market capitalism. So this should not be used as a failure of free market capitalism because this is the antithesis of it. This is Keynesian economics, not Austrian economics. And to understand what occurred there is, when it was the big fish eating the small fish, it's like, all right, well, that's going to happen. But when the big fish that ate all the small fish then formed like a Voltron fish and is like 5 different gigantic companies that are now one, that becomes gargantuan and too big to fail. And it's nuts. So wrapping up, this chapter covered the origins of corporations, interest, insurance, stock market, legal terms, maritime admiralty law, how the grunge came to be, corporations eating up smaller corporations, and then mergers and acquisitions to become gargantuan giants that are too big to fail. I recommend reading the chapter. It's a beautiful chapter, a great history lesson. I didn't cover it, word for word because I don't want to plagiarize, but some of the in-depth details are worth knowing. And Fuller did a great job writing the chapter, even if he's got a bias against corporations, which again, I can't fault him because he is a producer. So he's a good guy. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in chapter 4.